A struggling rancher rescued an 18-year-old girl from a cruel household. What happened next changed everything. Behind the saloon in Dustal, Arizona, the world was ending. The sun bled copper and shadow over the desert, but the heat didn't care. It clung to the adobe walls like a fever, baking in the stench of stale whiskey and old blood. Tied to a hitching post was a girl. Her name was Ida Colton. She was 18, and she'd forgotten what shoes felt like. Dust and dried blood were a second skin. Her arms, lashed behind her, screamed where the rope had bitten into the raw meat of her wrists. Her head hung low, her eyes as empty as a dry well. Men drifted past. Some glanced, some spat, some laughed. A drunk hollered something ugly, and his friend chuckled. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked why a girl was tied up like an animal behind a place where men went to lose themselves. Ada didn't flinch. Not when they whistled. Not when one of them tossed a gnawed chicken bone at her bare feet. She'd run out of reactions weeks ago. Numb was safe. Hope was a trap. The saloon doors shrieked open. A man in a stained vest and a rotten soul staggered out. Frank Lick, her stepfather. He swayed toward her, a tin cup in one hand, the fumes of cheap liquor rolling off him in waves. "She stays there till I get my money," he slurred to the empty air. But the air wasn't empty. From the edge of the street came the soft, steady sound of hooves. A man on a black gelding moving slow. Calderon Boone. He was broad in the shoulder, his skin weathered by wind and silence. His coat had seen more winters than he had. His face was a mask of hard leather, eyes lost in the shadow of his hat brim. He looked like a man who was used to the quiet, and a man the quiet listened to. He stopped. He didn't get down. He didn't ask a thing. Frank squinted at the rider. "What do you want?" he barked, his voice cracking with booze. Calder's voice was low, like rocks grinding at the bottom of a river. "That girl," Frank sneered, a string of spit hitting the dirt. "Ain't for sale. She's payment. Gambling debt." He gestured vaguely at the saloon. "My debt, paid in flesh, like the old laws." He kicked a little dust at Ida's feet. "She ain't got no papers. Ain't got no name worth sayin'." Calder didn't argue. He just reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small leather pouch. The clink of coins was the only sound in the street. "3 times what you lost," Calder said, his voice flat. He tossed the pouch. It landed in the dirt right between them. Frank stared at it, then back at Calder. His eyes narrowed to slits. "You deaf? Or just stupid? She ain't for sale." That's when Calder dismounted. Slow, deliberate, each step measured. Dust puffed up around his worn boots. He walked right past Frank, right to where Ida hung limp against the wood. He pulled a knife from his belt. The blade caught the last of the sun. Without a single word, he sliced through the ropes. They fell away like dead snakes. Ada didn't move. She stayed slumped, blinking at the ground as if she couldn't remember how to stand on her own. Calder held out a hand. It was rough, calloused, but steady. She looked at the hand, then at his shadowed face. There was no fear, no trust, just a dull, mechanical recognition that this man was not the one who had tied her there. She reached out. Her small, trembling hand disappeared into his. He led her to a pack mule tied beside his horse. She climbed onto its back without a sound. No questions. No plea for a drink of water. She just obeyed the silence. Behind them, Frank started shouting. Curses about lawmen, about contracts written in blood. Calder never looked back. They rode out of Dustal as the first lamps flickered to life in the saloon windows. The voices faded. The town vanished. The world behind them went quiet, and the world ahead was a vast, empty canvas of desert. Etta rode with her head down, arms wrapped around her own waist, as if holding herself together. A long time passed, the only sound the plodding of hooves. Then she spoke, her voice a dry whisper. "Are you going to sell me to someone else?" Calder didn't turn his head. "No." She nodded into the mule's mane. A minute passed. Are you going to hit me if I fall asleep? No. Her voice got smaller, so quiet it was almost lost to the wind. Will you lock me up in a barn? He was silent for a moment. The hooves kept their rhythm. Then, his voice came back, softer than before. There ain't a lock on my place. The desert stretched on, endless in gold. Her hands trembled, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She didn't cry, but deep inside her, something tight and twisted finally loosened, like a rope cut clean through. But as they rode deeper into the empty wilderness, a new kind of fear began to creep in. A man with no locks on his doors was a man with nothing to hide, or a man who didn't need locks to keep you prisoner. The trail to Calderon's ranch was long and silent. Ida didn't ask where they were going. Any place was better than the last. The mule's steady pace was a strange lullaby after years of shouting and slammed doors. When the cabin finally appeared, it wasn't much. Just a small wooden box pressed against a hill of scrub pine, with a sagging porch and a chimney that looked one good wind away from giving up. But it was quiet. Deathly quiet. Calder dismounted and helped her down. His hand was firm on her elbow, but not rough. He let go the second her feet were on the ground. He didn't speak. He just led her inside. The cabin was a single room. A stove, a table, 2 chairs. Against the far wall was a narrow bed with a faded quilt. A shelf of books sagged next to a lantern. Everything was worn, but it was clean. He pointed to a chair, then went through a back door. He came back with a dipper of cold well water and a thick slice of bread and cheese. He set them on the table in front of her. Ida just stared at the plate. He sat across from her, pouring himself some water, saying nothing. The silence was heavy. It felt like a test. Slowly, her hands shaking, she picked up the bread. It was the first food she'd eaten in days that didn't come with a threat. She chewed, her eyes darting from him to the plate and back again. When she finished, she whispered, "Thank you." Calder just nodded. Then he did something strange. He brought out a small metal basin, filled it with warm water from a kettle on the stove, and set it near the hearth. He hung a clean towel on a hook nearby. He didn't say what it was for. He didn't have to. Ida looked at the basin, then at him. "I can wash later," she mumbled, the words of a girl used to being told when and how to exist. "Do it now if you want," he said simply. "I'll be outside." And just like that, he was gone. She bathed quickly, scrubbing away layers of grime and fear. The water turned dark in seconds, but she felt lighter. He'd left a clean linen shirt on the bed, far too big for her, but soft. When she stepped out from behind the screen she'd used, the fire was banked low. Calder was already on a small cot near the window, his hat pulled down over his eyes. She stood there, uncertain, a ghost in his house. "Where do I sleep?" she whispered. He pointed a finger toward the main bed without lifting his hat. "That's yours," he said. "No one else here." Her voice cracked. "I don't want to be locked in." He shifted, the cot creaking. "There ain't a single lock in this whole place," he repeated. She moved to the bed, her hand gripping the quilt as if it might disappear. She lay down, pulling the covers up to her chin. She braced herself for the sounds she knew: a creaking door, heavy footsteps, a voice barking orders. None came. The night passed in total silence, broken only by the quiet breathing of the man across the room. For the first time in her life, Ida slept through till morning. No fists, no cold floors, no screams. But as the sun rose, she noticed something she hadn't seen in the dark. On the wall beside her bed, there were scratches in the wood. Dozens of them. Tally marks, counting off days, or maybe years. And next to them, carved deep, was a single frantic word: run. The word was a splinter in the quiet peace of the morning. Run. Ida stared at it, her blood turning to ice. Who carved it? And why? Was this cabin a sanctuary, or was it just a prettier cage? She slipped out of bed, her heart pounding. Calder was still asleep on his cot, a dark, unmoving shape. She tiptoed across the floor, her eyes scanning the room for any other sign, any other clue. She found it on the small, crooked bookshelf. Tucked behind a worn copy of the Bible was a small, leather-bound journal. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The handwriting was neat, feminine. It was a diary. The entries started out hopeful. Descriptions of the ranch, the quiet life. But the tone slowly changed. The writer spoke of Calder's silences, his long absences. She wrote about his moods, dark and sudden as a summer storm. Then the entries became more frantic. He watches me. I can't leave. The grave behind the barn. It's not for who he says it is. The last entry was just a few words, scrawled and shaky. He knows I know. If anyone finds this, my name is Alara. Don't trust him. Ida slammed the book shut, her breath catching in her throat. Alara. Was that Calder's wife? What did she know? Ida's mind raced back to his words. There ain't a lock on my place. Maybe he didn't need locks. Maybe the isolation, the endless empty desert was the lock. She had to know. She had to see the grave. She moved like a ghost out the front door and around the back of the barn. There it was, just as the diary described. A small grove of trees, a rough wooden marker beside a ring of stones. The name carved into the wood was faint, weathered by time. Clara Boone, not Alara. Ida felt a wave of confusion. Was the diary a lie? A trick of a paranoid mind? She knelt, her fingers tracing the carved letters. The ground around the marker was soft, recently disturbed. A sprig of dried lavender, just like the one mentioned in the diary, was tucked into the carving. It looked fresh. Acting on an impulse she didn't understand, Ida started to dig with her bare hands. The soil was loose. It didn't feel like a grave. A few inches down, her fingers hit something hard and flat. Not a coffin lid. It was a wooden plank. She pulled at it, grunting with the effort. It came free, revealing a dark, hollow space beneath. It wasn't a grave at all. It was a hideout. A cellar. A cold dread washed over her as she peered into the darkness. A faint, musty smell rose from the opening. There was a ladder leading down. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she had to know the truth. She took a deep breath and lowered herself into the dark. The cellar was small and damp. It held a few rotting crates and old tools. But in the far corner, something was covered by a heavy canvas tarp. Taking another shaky breath, Ida pulled the corner of the tarp back, and she screamed. It wasn't a body, it was worse. It was a collection of things. A woman's dress, folded neatly. A child's worn leather shoe, and a sheriff's badge, tarnished and caked with dried, dark mud. But it was the item next to the badge that made her blood run cold. It was another leather-bound journal, identical to the one in the cabin. She opened it. The handwriting was the same. Alara's. The last entry was dated just a week ago. He's bringing another one. I heard him talking in his sleep. A girl from Dustle. He calls them his broken birds. He says he's saving them, but he's just collecting them. He never lets them leave. I tried to run. That's why he built this place for me. My cage. If you're reading this, girl from Dustle, he's already decided you're his. He will never let you go. Suddenly, a shadow fell over the opening above her. Ida looked up, her heart stopping in her chest. Calder was standing there, looking down at her. His face was unreadable, a mask of stone. You shouldn't have done that, he said, his voice quiet, but with an edge like a freshly sharpened blade. He started down the ladder. Ida scrambled backward, her mind screaming. The journal was right. The tally marks on the wall weren't days, they were victims, broken birds, and she was the newest one in his collection. She was trapped. She looked around frantically for a weapon. An old, rusted shovel lay against the wall. She grabbed it, holding it in front of her like a shield. "Stay back," she cried, her voice trembling. Calder reached the bottom of the ladder and took a step toward her. He didn't look angry. He looked sad. "Ilara," he said, his voice soft. "It's not what you think." "My name is Ada!" she shrieked. "You're a monster! A kidnapper! A killer!" He kept walking toward her, his hands held out, palms open. "I'm not! I swear to you! That badge! It was mine! I was the sheriff of this county! Liar!" She swung the shovel. He ducked easily, the rusted metal scraping against the dirt wall. "Listen to me," he pleaded. "Clara Boone was my wife. And our daughter. They were killed. By a man named Claiborne. He ran this territory, owned the judge, owned the law. I tried to stop him. He sent men to my home. They burned it to the ground, with Clara and my little girl inside." His voice broke, thick with a pain so raw it stunned Ida into silence. "I couldn't prove it," he went on, his eyes hollow. "Claiborne had alibis, witnesses. He ruined me. I lost everything. I quit the law. I came out here to hide, to disappear." "Then who is Ilara?" Ada whispered, the shovel still held tight in her hands. "Ilara was the first girl I found after them," he said. "She was just like you, tied to a post, sold for a debt. I brought her here. I gave her a place to stay, to heal. But she was broken in a way I couldn't fix. She was terrified of everything, of me most of all. She thought I was keeping her prisoner." He sighed, a sound heavy with failure. "She wrote those things in the journals. She carved the warning on the wall. One night, she just ran off into the desert. I never saw her again. I keep her things to remind me that saving someone isn't always enough." Ida stared at him, her mind reeling. Could it be true? The pain in his eyes felt real. The story fit, but so did the one in the journals. He was either a grieving man trying to do right, or a brilliant monster. "What about the other tally marks?" she demanded. "There were no others," he said simply. "Just Ilara. She marked every single day she was here." Before Ada could process this, a new sound cut through the air. Hoofbeats. Several riders, approaching the cabin fast. Calder's head snapped up. His eyes, which had been filled with sorrow, now flashed with something else. Pure, cold fury. "Claiborne," he spat. He looked at Ida, his expression urgent. "You have to choose, Ida, right now. Do you believe her?" He gestured to the journal in her hand. "Or do you believe me? Because they're not here for me. They're here for you." The riders burst into the yard, their voices loud and cruel. "Boone, we know you got her in there. Send out our property." Ida's world narrowed to a single point. A dark cellar, a man's impossible story, and a choice that would mean the difference between freedom and a fate worse than death. The truth was buried here, and she had seconds to dig it up. The voice from outside was familiar. It wasn't Frank's. It was someone new, someone with an authority that chilled her to the bone. "Calderon Boone! By the authority of the territorial court, you are harboring a fugitive asset. Send out the girl Adamina McCrae." Adamina McCrae. The name hit her like a punch. That was her mother's maiden name, a name she hadn't used in 10 years. How did they know it? Calder looked at her, his jaw tight. "That's him. That's Claiborne." Ada's mind was a whirlwind. Ilara's journal or Calder's story. A madman or a broken hero. Outside, Claiborne's men were dismounting, the jingle of spurs and the cocking of rifles echoing in the quiet morning. "What do I do?" she whispered, her eyes wide with panic. "You hide," Calder said, his voice all business now. He pointed to the dark corner behind the crates. "Stay there. Don't make a sound, no matter what you hear. I'll handle this. He turned and climbed the ladder without another look back. Ida scrambled behind the crates, pulling the dusty tarp over herself, her heart hammering so loud she was sure they could hear it upstairs. She heard Calder's boots hit the ground above, then the sound of him walking toward the cabin door. The front door creaked open. "Claiborne," Calder's voice was flat, dead. "You're not welcome on my land." "Your land?" A smooth, oily voice laughed. It was a sound that made Ida's skin crawl. "I hold the paper on half this territory, Boone, including this pathetic little scrap of dirt. And I hold the paper on the girl. She's not property." "That's a matter of legal interpretation," Claiborne purred. "A contract signed by her legal guardian, Frank Lick. She was wagered in a game of chance and lost fair and square. She belongs to me now. This is a simple retrieval." Ida heard the shuffle of feet on the porch. "I told you to leave," Calder said, his voice dangerously low. There was a sudden, sickening thud, followed by Calder's grunt of pain. Ida clamped a hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. They were fighting. She could hear them, grunts and curses, and the sound of fists hitting flesh. It went on for what felt like an eternity. Then, a heavy body hit the floor of the cabin right above her head. Silence. Ida held her breath, straining to hear. "Check the barn," Claiborne's oily voice commanded. "Search everywhere. She couldn't have gone far." Footsteps moved away from the cabin. Ida's hope surged for a split second before another voice, younger and crueler, spoke from right inside the house. "What do we do with him?" "Leave him," Claiborne said. "He's a washed-up old lawman with no friends and no fight left in him. He's not a threat. Find the girl. She's worth more than he is." The door slammed shut. Ida waited, every muscle screaming with tension. She counted to 100. Then 200. Finally, trembling, she crawled out from under the tarp. She had to see if Calder was alive. She climbed the ladder, her head just barely poking above the ground. The cabin was a wreck. The table was overturned, chairs splintered, and lying in the middle of the floor was Calder, a pool of blood forming under his head. He was completely still. Ada's breath hitched. She was about to rush to his side when she saw it. Tucked into his boot was the edge of a piece of paper. It looked old, folded many times. Her curiosity warred with her fear. Keeping low, she crept into the cabin, her eyes darting toward the windows. She knelt beside Calder, her fingers shaking as she pulled the paper from his boot. It wasn't a legal document, it was a drawing. A child's drawing, done in charcoal. A simple stick-figure family. A tall man, a woman with long hair, and a small child holding a flower. Underneath, in messy, childish letters, was a single word: Boone. Tears pricked Ida's eyes. It was his family. The story was true. Suddenly Calder groaned, his eyes fluttering open. He focused on her, his gaze hazy with pain. "Ida," he rasped. They took the box." "What box?" "The evidence." He coughed, a fleck of blood on his lips. "From the cellar, my proof against him. They knew where to look." He struggled to sit up. "Ilara. She didn't run away. She went back to him. She made a deal, her freedom. For my secrets." The betrayal was so cold, so absolute, it stole Ida's breath. Ilara hadn't been a victim. She'd been a Judas. The journals, the warning on the wall, it was all a setup, a trap to make sure the next girl wouldn't trust him, to make her easy to retrieve. And it had almost worked. "They're searching the ranch," Ida said, her voice urgent. "They think I'm hiding." "They won't find you," Calder said, gritting his teeth as he pushed himself up against a broken chair. "They'll be back. For me. And they'll wait for you to return." He was right. She couldn't run. There was nowhere to go. Claiborne wouldn't stop until he had her. There was only one path left. Not running. Not hiding. Fighting. "He taught me how to shoot," she whispered, more to herself than to him. The rifle. It was still hanging on the wall where he'd left it. Calder looked at her, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than pain showed in his eyes. Respect. "He thinks you're just a broken girl," he said. "He thinks you're property. He's about to find out how wrong he is." Ida looked from the broken man on the floor to the rifle on the wall. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But now, it was mixed with something else. A hot, burning rage. Claiborne hadn't just come for her body. He'd come for her future, her freedom, her soul. She walked to the wall and took down the rifle. It was heavy in her hands, solid and real. She checked the load. She remembered Calder's words. Breathe. Squeeze. Don't pull. She was done being the victim. She was done being a pawn in other people's games. They thought she was a broken bird. It was time to show them she had claws. Ida helped Calder to his feet, tearing a strip from her shirt to bandage the gash on his head. He was leaning heavily on her, his breath ragged, but his eyes were clear and hard as flint. "They'll come back through the yard," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Claiborne likes to make an entrance. He'll have his men spread out. Caleb, his right-hand man, will take the barn. The other two will circle the house." "How do you know?" "Because that's what I would do," Calder said, a grim shadow of a smile touching his lips. "He learned everything he knows about tactics from hunting me." They didn't have much time. Ida moved with a purpose she didn't know she possessed. She helped Calder to the window overlooking the yard, propping him up with the rifle resting on the sill. "Can you shoot?" she asked. "One shot," he said, his voice tight with pain. "I can give you one good shot. Make it count." Ida grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the hearth, her own weapon, and moved to the front door, hiding in the narrow space beside it. The plan was desperate, insane. They were two broken people against a small army. But for the first time, Ida felt a sliver of hope. It wasn't the hope of being rescued. It was the hope of taking her life back with her own two hands. The sound of hooves returned, slower this time, more deliberate. Confident. Ada peeked through a crack in the door. Claiborne was in the center, a smug smile on his face. Caleb was already heading toward the barn. The other two were splitting off, just as Calder had predicted. "They can't find her!" Claiborne called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "No matter. We'll burn this place to the ground. She'll run out eventually. Flush her out like the rat she is." That was the signal. From the window, Calder's rifle cracked. The shot echoed across the plains. One of the men circling the house cried out and crumpled to the ground, clutching his leg. One down. Claiborne's head snapped toward the cabin, his smug smile vanishing, replaced by a snarl of fury. "Inside! She's in the house with him! Get them!" Caleb, who was halfway to the barn, turned and charged toward the porch. The remaining henchmen followed close behind. This was it. The door flew open. Caleb stormed in, pistol raised. Ida swung the cast-iron skillet with all her might. The sound of metal hitting bone was sickeningly loud. Caleb's eyes rolled back in his head, and he dropped like a sack of rocks. The second man hesitated for a fatal second, shocked. From the window, Calder, using the last of his strength, swung the butt of his empty rifle, catching the man in the back of the head as he passed. He stumbled forward, and Ada was there to meet him, swinging the heavy skillet again. He went down without a sound. Silence fell, thick and sudden. Ida stood panting, the skillet clutched in her white-knuckled grip. Her body trembled, but her mind was sharp, clear. Outside, Claiborne was screaming her name, his voice a vile stream of curses. He was alone. Calder slumped against the wall, his one good shot having taken everything he had left. "It's just him now, Ida," he rasped. "Finish it." Ida looked at the two unconscious men on her floor, then at the open doorway. She could hear Claiborne reloading his pistol, his footsteps crunching in the dirt as he approached the porch. This was her fight. She dropped the skillet. It clattered loudly on the wooden floor. She walked over to Caleb's motionless form and picked up his pistol. It felt cold and alien in her hand. She had never held one before. But she knew the basics. Point. Squeeze. She stepped out onto the porch, into the harsh afternoon sun. Claiborne was 10 feet away, his own pistol leveled at her chest. His fine coat was splattered with dirt, and his face was a mask of disbelief and rage. "You?" he hissed. "A little slip of a girl? You did this?" "I'm not little," Ida said, her voice steady, surprising even herself. She raised the pistol, her hands shaking only slightly. "And I'm not a girl. And I am not yours." Claiborne laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You think you can win? With him bleeding out in there and you holding a gun for the first time? I own the law. I own this land. I own you." He took a step forward. "Put the gun down, and I'll consider letting you live." Ida's eyes narrowed. She saw him for what he was, not a powerful man, but a bully, a coward who hid behind paper and paid thugs. All his power came from making people feel small, and right now, she had never felt bigger. "No," she said. His smile vanished. His finger tightened on the trigger. "Wrong answer." They fired at the same time. The world exploded in a deafening roar of gunpowder. Ada felt a searing, white-hot pain rip through her left shoulder. The force of it threw her backward against the cabin wall. She slid to the porch floor, the pistol falling from her numb fingers. Through a haze of pain, she saw Claiborne. He was standing perfectly still, a look of utter shock on his face. He looked down. A small, dark red circle was blooming on the front of his pristine white shirt, right over his heart. He looked back up at Etta, his mouth opening as if to say something. But no words came out. He took one wobbly step, then another, and then he collapsed face first into the dust his boots had kicked up. He didn't move again. Ida lay against the wall, the world swimming in and out of focus. The pain in her shoulder was immense, a fire that consumed her. But through it all, one thought burned brighter. I did it. I'm free. Then the darkness closed in, and she knew no more. She woke to the smell of coffee and wood smoke. For a moment, she was back in that first morning, full of fear and suspicion. But this time the feeling was different. The air was still, peaceful. She tried to sit up, and a sharp pain in her shoulder made her gasp. "Easy now," a voice said. She opened her eyes. Calder was sitting in a chair beside the bed. His head was bandaged, and his arm was in a sling, but he was alive. Her left shoulder was tightly wrapped, the linen clean and white. "You were out for 2 days," he said, his voice quiet. "The wound is clean. The bullet went straight through. You were lucky." Ada looked around the room. The cabin was clean. The broken furniture had been repaired or replaced. The bodies were gone. It was as if the fight had never happened. "What? What happened?" she whispered. "Neighbors," Calder said simply. "They heard the shots. Old Man Hemlock from the next ridge over. May from down the valley. They came riding. Found us." He managed a small, pained smile. "Turns out a washed-up old lawman does have some friends after all." "And Claiborne?" "They buried him where he fell," Calder said, his voice flat. "No marker. The other two, Caleb and his friend, they woke up. When they saw Claiborne was dead and the whole valley was standing on my porch with rifles, they decided to find a new line of work somewhere far away from here." Etta sank back into the pillows, a wave of relief so powerful it left her dizzy. It was over. It was truly over. "The box," she said suddenly. "The evidence." "May has it," Calder said. "She's taking it to the territorial marshal in Prescott. Seems Claiborne made a lot of enemies over the years. With him gone, people are finally willing to talk. The law he owned is about to be dismantled piece by piece. Justice. It was a word she'd only ever heard in stories. They were quiet for a long time, the only sound the crackling of the fire. You saved my life, Ida, Calder said finally, looking at her, his eyes full of a raw emotion she'd never seen in him before. You saved mine first, she whispered. He reached out with his good hand and gently took hers. His grip was warm, steady. I was wrong, he said. About Alara. About saving people. I thought I was giving her a sanctuary, but I was just giving her a place to hide. I never taught her how to fight back. You learned that on your own. He looked down at their joined hands. This place, this ranch, I built it to be a tomb, a place to bury my past, but it doesn't have to be. He looked back up at her, his gaze intense. If you'll stay, we can make it a home, not a sanctuary, not a place to hide, a place to live. Tears filled Ida's eyes, but for the first time in her life, they weren't tears of pain or fear. They were tears of hope. She thought of the long road that had brought her here. The post, the silence, the fear, the journals, the fight. She wasn't the same girl who had ridden out of Dustle on the back of a mule. She wasn't property. She wasn't a victim. She was a survivor. She squeezed his hand. I'm already home, she said. Years passed like seasons across the plains. The ranch thrived. The small cabin grew, room by room, built with their own hands. The garden overflowed with vegetables, and the fences stood straight and strong against the wind. Ida learned to ride like she was born in the saddle, to mend a fence, to set a broken bone. The scars on her body faded, and the scars on her soul learned to be part of her strength, not her weakness. Calder's silences were no longer heavy, but filled with a comfortable peace. He taught her about the land, about the stars, about the quiet resilience of the desert. He smiled more, laughed even. The ghosts of his past still walked with him, but they no longer consumed him. One day, a letter arrived from the marshal in Prescott. Claiborne's entire criminal empire had been brought down. Lands were returned to their rightful owners. His corrupt judges and lawmen were in prison. The letter included a deed, clear and legal, for Calderon Boone's ranch, and another document, a formal emancipation for one Adamina McCrae, declaring her a free and independent citizen, no longer bound to any contract or debt. Ida held the paper in her hand, but it felt meaningless. She had freed herself long ago, on a dusty porch with a borrowed gun. That evening they rode out to the ridge overlooking their valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in strokes of fire and gold. They didn't speak, just sat on their horses, side by side, watching the day end. Do you ever think about leaving? Calder asked quietly. Seeing the world beyond this valley? Ida looked at the ranch below them, their home, a small beacon of light and warmth in the vast wilderness. She thought of the quiet strength of the man beside her. She thought of the woman she had become in this place. Everything I need to see, she said, is right here. He reached over, taking her hand. They weren't a rescuer and his ward. They weren't a master and his property. They were partners, two broken souls who had found a way to become whole, not in spite of their scars, but because of them. Together, they had built more than a ranch. They had built a life. And as the last of the sun disappeared, leaving the sky to the stars, they turned their horses and rode home. If you were moved by Ida's journey from a broken girl to a fearless survivor, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Here at Frontier Justice, we believe the most powerful stories are the ones where ordinary people find extraordinary courage. Click the bell icon so you never miss a tale of grit, redemption, and the untamed spirit of the West. What was the bravest thing you've ever had to do? Let us know in the comments below. and we'll see you on the next ride.